You know the queue that has not moved in 10 minutes. Some part of you knows the other line is faster, but you do not leave because leaving now would mean those 10 minutes bought you nothing. So you check your phone, do the math, and stay anyway. You know it in the relationship too. The one where a version of you from 3 years ago made a promise. You're still trying to keep faith with that version, even though the relationship quietly stopped working long ago. You know it in the job you took because it looked right on paper and the degree you are 2 years into that you can no longer picture yourself using. You keep going, not because it is working, but because you have already paid for it. This is not stubbornness. Stubbornness would look the same from the outside, but it comes from somewhere else. Stubbornness is refusing to change your mind. What is actually happening is that your mind is protecting a story about who you are. Someone who chooses well, who does not waste, who finishes what they start. Every extra dollar, month, or year you put in raises the cost of admitting the choice was wrong. So the mind takes the cheaper option. It keeps going, and it calls that loyalty or grit or patience. Psychologists call the underlying process self-justification. It comes from a theory the psychologist Leon Festinger described in 1957. He called it cognitive dissonance. When two beliefs collide, I am someone who makes good decisions and this decision is failing, the mind tends to resolve the discomfort. It changes the second belief instead of the first. It is easier to believe the job will turn around than to believe you misjudged it from the start. This is why the degree feels different from a hobby you dropped after a few weekends. The more hours, money, and identity you have already poured into being someone who is getting that degree, the harder it becomes to picture yourself as anything else. And the mind will protect that identity long after the evidence stops supporting it. Here is why the pull gets stronger, not weaker, as the cost rises. A study published in the journal Science tested this pattern across 3 species, mice, rats, and humans. Each ran a closely matched task. The question was simple. Once a creature had already started waiting for a reward, how much longer would it keep waiting? The finding that matters is this: sensitivity to the time already spent only appeared after the decision to commit had been made. While deciding, all 3 species weighed the situation clearly. Once committed, that clarity dropped away. The trap is not in the choosing, it is in what happens to your judgment in the moment right after you choose. That is also the part that explains why this shows up in creatures with no story to protect and no image to maintain. Something about commitment itself changes how a brain, any brain, weighs what happens next. Researchers have pulled together more than 160 separate studies of people escalating commitment to a failing course of action. One finding stands out. The people most likely to keep going were the ones who had chosen the path themselves, not the ones who inherited it, not the ones who were simply told to continue. So this was never really about the job, or the relationship, or the queue. It was about protecting the choice. The more visibly yours the choice was, the harder it became to unmake. In relationships specifically, psychologist Carol Rusbult's investment model looked at this directly. Researchers have since followed couples over months at a time, and they keep finding the same thing. What predicts whether they stay is not only how the relationship feels day to day, it's how much they have already invested, the shared friends, the shared history, the years that would feel wasted if it ended. Time counts, so does money, so does the version of yourself you built around the relationship. And that holds true even after accounting for how happy they actually are. You can be genuinely unhappy and still unable to leave, because leaving does not just end a relationship, It retires an investment, and that queue you cannot leave has a cousin in something as small as a coffee loyalty card. Researchers studying purchase behavior tested this directly. Some customers started with a few stamps already filled in. Others started from zero. Everyone needed to make the same number of purchases to earn the reward. The customers who started closer to that reward finished noticeably faster. Nothing about the actual cost had changed. Only their sense of how close they were. Proximity to a finish line does not just motivate you. It quietly distorts how you weigh the cost of continuing against the cost of stopping. It works the same way whether the reward is a free coffee or a promotion you have been chasing for years. The closer you are, the worse your math gets. So here is the question that actually breaks the pattern. It comes from a review of decades of this research. The conclusion was simple. Judge a decision only on what happens next. Whatever you already spent, the money, the time, the years, is already gone. That's not a verdict on you. It's just arithmetic. Nothing about continuing brings any of it back. Turned into something you can actually ask yourself, it sounds like this. If I were arriving at this decision fresh today, knowing everything I now know, would I choose it? Not whether the last 3 years were wasted. That question always answers itself. The further you have come, the more it costs to admit you were wrong, and the mind will defend the sunk years every time. The honest question is narrower. Is the next year worth choosing on its own terms, starting from nothing? That question works because it removes the one variable that was never supposed to matter in the first place. What you already spent. It puts the decision back where it belongs, on what happens from here, not on what you would be admitting by leaving. The relationship, the degree, the job, the queue, none of them care how long you have already stood there. Only you do, and that is exactly the part of the calculation you are allowed to set down. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If this video gave you something to think about, do one small thing. Subscribe to Cool My Mind Psychology. Every video here unpacks the hidden psychology behind how we think, feel, and act, and subscribing is how you'll never miss the next one. Take care of your mind, and I will see you in the next video.